Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Council, Director Misner. My name is Peter Albert. I'm with the MTA, and I work closely with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development on the America's Cup. And what I'm happy to present to you is a status report on where we are in doing the transportation planning for the America's Cup. And I appreciate the support of your staff with all of the accommodations on our PowerPoint presentation, and hope that it is very informative. While the PowerPoint presentation is being set up, I can go ahead and give an overview of really what's happening with the America's Cup and the planning that's going on. As you may know, San Francisco is virtually selected to be the host of the America's Cup. The final decision comes upon the certification of the environmental document, which we expect to be complete late this fall. When that certification is there, then San Francisco and the America's Cup Event Authority join together to prepare for hosting the races of the America's Cup and the races that happened in 2012 preceding the America's Cup races in 2013. And that's a very important part of our transportation planning, is understanding this great opportunity to host a series of small races called the World Series races in 2012, where the different teams that are competing in 2013 have a chance to try our waters in San Francisco Bay, see how their boats do. Sometimes there will be spectacular races, sometimes there will be spectacular crashes, but it's all part of the excitement of the event because it is a very fast-moving and exciting and unprecedented sailing event. So on the screen before you is an image of some of the very state-of-the-art racing boats that you'll see in San Francisco Bay over the next 2 years. Now, in the planning for transportation, it's important to see if we receive as many as the hundreds of thousands of spectators that people expect will come to San Francisco to see the races, that we take advantage of the time now to plan in advance to accommodate these people, to make accessibility a front and center part of our transportation plan, to think of all the different modes of transportation and how they work together to support a sustainable, accessible, and successful World Series races and America's Cup races. So in the overview that I'm going to present today, I'll talk about the event timeline, the schedule of how the event comes to fold, the course area itself, where the races will happen, the status of our planning efforts, working with the city, working with the America's Cup Event Authority and the America's Cup Organizing Committee, the implementation plans, the different plans that are required to make sure that this event comes off successfully, and we'll focus specifically on the people plan, which is really the transportation plan, over which I've been the primary point person for the city. And then I would be happy to have questions and answers. The timeline of the America's Cup includes those World Series races I mentioned. They're races that allow the different teams, and I believe there are 9 teams?
9 boats, 8 teams, 7 countries.
9 boats, 8 teams, 7 countries that are competing in the World Series races to position for the Challenger Series in 2013. Now this is important for us to realize. This is the first time that the America's Cup, which is the oldest international sporting event with a cup, and it's also the 3rd largest international sporting event in terms of draw after the Olympics, after the America's Cup, or the World Cup soccer, that this is the first time that we will be able to see the races from the land or be participants in the viewer sites from the land. It's also the first time that the races will be preceded by the World Series races the year before. So we expect that they will be setting up excitement and that people can casually or more directly get engaged in being part of the whole event. Now the World Series races are already underway. They just concluded in Portugal. They will be now, they're underway now, I believe, in Plymouth, England. They'll travel around the world before they come to San Francisco in 2012. They will include stops such as San Diego, Venice, Newport, Rhode Island, Naples, Italy. And then in summer of 2012, San Francisco hosts the final stage of these World Series races. And that gives us a terrific opportunity to really test the planning policies that I'm going to outline for you for transportation, to see if we've got them right, to see if we've handled security, safety, accessibility, multimodal transportation adequately, as the big numbers, the big view numbers will appear in 2013. And in 2013 are 2 series of races, the Louis Vuitton Challenger Series, and then finally the America's Cup Series, which will be from September 7th through September 22nd in 2013. Now, those races are not every single day between September 7th and 22nd. There's a series of race days, off days. The weather is a big factor on whether the race will be held, so we build in flexibility in our schedule to accommodate that. On the screen is an image of the race course area, and I can describe that for you as well. The race course area that we're studying for the purposes of environmental review is very broad. It's roughly between the Golden Gate Bridge, Angel Island, Treasure Island, and the San Francisco Bay Bridge, and then along the northern waterfront of San Francisco. That course, being defined as broadly as it is to allow the environmental review team to make sure they've analyzed as broadly as they can potential impacts. But because of the speed of these boats and the shortness of these new races, the actual race area itself is much smaller than that, and it would be within that broader area, roughly between the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz, and Pier 27, 29, and along the northern waterfront of San Francisco. So that really will be where the races are expected to happen, with the idea being that the backdrop of the Golden Gate Bridge and the wonderful topography we have in the Bay Area make this that much more photogenic of a race. Now, what I didn't mention on this slide are, in yellow, are shown the view areas. These are the areas where we think people who are interested in the races will come in the greatest numbers. They include Crissy Field, the Marina Green, the Aquatic Park, Fort Mason, Pier 27 and 29, which will become the America's Cup headquarters in 2013. And then we've also identified areas where there's sensitive habitat, because we want to make sure that we're protective of the special habitat areas in the San Francisco Bay Area, such as portions of the Presidio along Crissy Field, and then around Alcatraz where there's sensitive water habitat. The image on the screen now is the Marina Green in 2012. While the construction is taking place on Pier 27 and 29 for the race pavilion for the America's Cup, we will host we will headquarters the World Series races at the Marina Green in 2012. So the image on the screen shows the sort of approach, a light touch approach to the Marina Green, using tents and light structures with minimal impact on the lawn to allow there to be gathering, bandstands, seating areas, the media headquarters, while the construction takes place on the pavilion on Pier 27-29 for the races in 2013. The next image on the screen is the proposal for what happens at Pier 27 and 29, and I can describe that as saying that there will be a broad open space with an amphitheater for event-related cultural activities, and notably a new pavilion that will be the headquarters for the America's Cup races in 2013, that will also be part of our legacy for the city of San Francisco as a permanent home to the new cruise terminal. So there's a benefit that goes beyond the America's Cup race that comes with hosting this event. Also important to the race management is what happens with Piers 30 and 32 south of the Bay Bridge. Pier 30 and 32, the image on the screen shows that this is where the team bases will be. This is sort of the industrial home for the races, where the boats will be assembled. People who love boats can come here and watch the actual workings of preparing the boats as they're being put into play in the races farther north along the waterfront. So this ends up being important for us to understand that this itself might be an attraction in all of the realm of attractions that come with the America's Cup Series. The status of the America's Cup planning right now, we are underway in our CEQA process, California Environmental Quality Act, completing the environmental review through the provisions of the state ordinances. The draft EIR has been published. It was published in July. We've received many comments. The comment period closed in August, and we're now underway addressing the comments and responses individually in entirety. We expect that the process will be in conclusion for certification readiness in November, December of this year. Also underway will be a national Environmental Protection Agency environmental review clearance. So we're doing the state process now. The national one will be in the spring of next year. We expect that to be published. That will be co-managed by the U.S. Coast Guard and the National Park Service, because they have the responsibility as national entities to make sure they look at potential environmental impacts on federal property. And then we expect to have a finding of no significant impact in May or June of 2012. There are 11 implementation plans associated with the agreement with San Francisco and the America's Cup Event Authority. 9 plans are actually required by agreement. San Francisco went on to add 2 more to make a richer, more comprehensive set of plans we'll deal with. They include the advertising plan, the ambush marketing plan, the Parks Event Operations Plan, which includes how we manage viewing sites and how we look at the use of parks and viewing site locations for the events. The People Plan, which is a transportation plan I'll talk to you in more detail. A Public Safety Plan, and I just came from a meeting with the San Francisco Police Department, Parking and Traffic. We've met with the Coast Guard, the FBI. There's a lot of focus and attention to make sure that this is a safe and secure event. The Sustainability Plan, I actually came from a meeting this morning as well on the sustainability document, which is broad and looking at all aspects of the America's Cup from the viewpoint of sustainability. The Team-Based Operations Plan, the Water and Air Traffic Plan, the Workforce Development Plan, and then a Youth Involvement Plan, a new component that makes this an opportunity for the youth of San Francisco to be engaged in the America's Cup events. And then also a Zero Waste Plan. These are all the implementation plans that we hope to have in place by 2012 when we have the World Series races. For the People Plan, there are 5 guiding principles that have served well. We include a resource efficiency component, using the infrastructure we've already got in San Francisco and enhancing it and improving it, adding frequency to transit lines, building on the network we already have to make sure that people who aren't even involved in the races but just want to go to and from work or have access around San Francisco still have the same and if not better transportation opportunities while we host this race. So we propose using existing lines and shoring them up with added frequency and making the pedestrian and bicycle connections better rather than introducing a whole host of new and unfamiliar transportation programs to San Francisco. At the same time, we're looking at environmental sustainability as a principle, not just in promoting alternative transportation, reducing emissions, but also looking at where people go and making sure that we steer clear of sensitive habitat in our transportation planning. The strategic adaptability component of our principle includes really being flexible and understanding that the needs of the race vary depending on who uses what element of the transportation plan. Of course, that includes accessibility, but it also includes sizing the transportation response. Not every day in 2013 will be that big day of 350,000 viewers. Some days in the World Series race may only be a few thousand viewers. So the transit providers we've been working with, and there are many, including BART, Caltrain, Golden Gate, WIDA, Caltrans, AC Transit, they've all given us their service plans, and we've worked with them to figure out the big days with the big race numbers and then smaller days where they don't need to deploy as much resources. Same thing with parking control officers, same thing with traffic operations. So that adaptability is key to making sure that we manage a fiscally responsible set of transportation programs. Public safety is a guiding principle that overrides all other concerns if we need to, but we're hoping to make sure that public safety is a partner along with the other principles. Positive legacy is pretty important for all of us. The idea of hosting these races is one thing. The aftermath of the races, that San Francisco is better off because we've hosted these races, that we've introduced new programs and broken down more barriers to transportation and access, is a legacy that we all hope we get out of the America's Cup. The timeline for the People Plan includes the preparation and the publication of the preliminary draft, which was by agreement in March, and we managed that. We uploaded that draft and spent a lot of time discussing and illustrating aspects of that People Plan to the point where we got a lot of public feedback. Up till May, we uploaded all that feedback, and that then advised all of our partners, whether it's BART, Caltrans, Caltrain, the Parking and Traffic. They looked at the public comment that we uploaded in May, and they then directed their transportation response guided by this public information. We then posted their input in July to make sure that people could see what the preliminary proposal from all of our transit partners, transportation providers, would be, so that we could continue to get public comment based on that. We also, at that time, included the first robust section on accessibility, and it was a draft section which we brought before MOD and the Council, and got a lot of great feedback. We also brought it to Muni's Accessible Advisory Committee, and that has helped shape a much stronger, I think, more proactive accessibility section in the People Plan, and I continue to hope to get that feedback as we work together. Also in that section is a transportation demand management We needed to make sure that the employers, employees, the schools, the institutions that just need to go about their business can also do some advanced planning as transportation becomes a huge demand during 2012 and 2013. We have a Transportation Demand Program Manager at MTA now, Carly Payne, who's been instrumental in organizing all of this coordination with employers, employees, schools, and institutions. The final and third progress report was uploaded in September. That includes all of the feedback we've got, but it also includes a focus on public safety and security and a lot more detail on the individual modes. Our goal and our obligation is to have a final draft people plan published on September 30th, which will still be a living document because it will adjust to what we hear from the environmental review process, and importantly, will be opened again and revised in 2012 when we tried our hand at the World Series races and figured out where we need to make adjustments in our plan. The image on the screen now shows some of the Muni transit strategies, and I'll describe them briefly. On the theme of efficiency, using existing Muni lines that go where we want people to go and where people want to go. Lines that connect the transit hubs of BART and Caltrain with the waterfront, such as the 47 running up and down Van Ness. There will be a special 47 limited line, fully accessible, that stops limited stops between Civic Center, BART, and Fort Mason, giving everybody quick and easy access up and down Van Ness Avenue, even if you're not going to the races. This is a wonderful amenity, we hope. The same with the 30 Stockton. That line connects Caltrain, BART, Union Square. It also connects major tourist destinations like Chinatown and North Beach before it then heads along major viewing sites, Fort Mason, Aquatic Park, Crissy Field, Marina Green. We would propose to augment that 30 Stockton line, which is very crowded and very heavily used, with a limited bus that goes more quickly along the same corridor using Kearny and Broadway to get through quicker parts of town, but still giving that access and, again, still helping people just trying to go to and from different parts of San Francisco, as well as moving, let's say, a visitor from Union Square out to the waterfront. In addition to those bus line augments are the proposed E-line. This is a new streetcar line that we've been talking about for years that would run from Caltrain and Mission Bay along the waterfront in the southern part, on the Embarcadero, past the ferry building, all the way to Fisherman's Wharf. This supplements the existing F-line service, and in addition to that supplement would be a F shuttle running just between the ferry building and the wharf, where we have the greatest demand for tourists. We also propose to add Muni Metro trains in the subway, as we expect that the subway will be busier in the busy days, much like we do with the ballpark situation. Now, this is just the Muni plan. The regional partners that we've been working with all along have also offered their own augmentations. Golden Gate Transit, for instance. You may know that right now Golden Gate Transit is not under operation. It's supposed to pick up and drop off people in San Francisco. They can pick up people in Marin and Sonoma, drop them off in San Francisco on the way into town. On the way out, they pick up the commuters. They don't drop them off in San Francisco. They drop them off on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, with the exception of the toll plaza. We'd like to break that down. We're getting their cooperation, Muni's cooperation, MTC's cooperation, and taking two lines, adding them to the network, and these lines would serve as local service lines that any San Franciscan can use as well. One running up and down Van Ness Avenue to Civic Center BART. That's the existing 93. We augment that with this extra service and open it up for local trips. The same thing with the 4, which runs along Lombard Street, then along the waterfront on Bay Street, and then goes down on the east side of Telegraph Hill. So that gives access to people who live in the east side of Telegraph Hill, people along the waterfront, people in the marina, using Golden Gate Transit as a partner with Muni. And that second line goes to the BART station and to the Transbay Terminal. So this idea of partnering with regional transit is being tested out in the America's Cup series. The additional transit lines I show in this map include BART. BART will make sure they have longer trains running more frequently throughout the race days, especially the weekends. Caltrain will add a train to the service. AC Transit will propose additional service as well to the East Bay with a new stop at Treasure Island. Right now, the only bus service to Treasure Island is Muni. This gives us a chance to try something we've wanted to do, which is East Bay San Francisco access to Treasure Island. And then we have the ferries themselves offering extra boat service, possibly looking at a ferry service to Treasure Island. We'll work through that, with accessibility being a major concern, and we want to make sure that if we have a facility there, that it is fully accessible from boat to pier to Treasure Island. Another proposal is that they're opening a new ferry landing in South San Francisco. That could be a wonderful augment to our system and giving people from the peninsula a transit way to get to downtown San Francisco, in addition to BART and Caltrain on the peninsula. The image on the screen right now is the idea of a temporary bicycle and pedestrian corridor along the Embarcadero. Because we expect so many people to be on the sidewalks in front of the Embarcadero and so many people on bikes, and by the way, we're also debuting our bike sharing program this spring, which will be a big part of the mix, we wanted to make sure that there was adequate room and safety for everybody on the Embarcadero sidewalk. As you know, it's already a challenge with bicycles and pedestrians in the volumes that they are right now on that sidewalk. The idea of looking at the right lane at the Embarcadero as a special bike and pedestrian corridor is important. It's what we'd like to propose. It gives more breathing room for everybody on those peak of peak race weekend days. The other opportunity in the idea of that corridor and the parallel corridor of the streetcars is that we have extra emergency vehicle access. If we need to, by allowing that area to be closed off to just bicycles and pedestrians and looking at the rail corridor parallel to it, that gives us 2 extra avenues for an emergency vehicle to get quickly to the heart of the activity if need be. We look at satellite parking and we look at close-in parking. The satellite parking image on the screen now shows that the strategy is to have parking lots that are sort of outside the main area of the waterfront and downtown, where people who need to drive can come pretty close to everything without being caught up in the congestion. So some of the suggestions are near the ballpark, AT&T Park, where there's good connections to Caltrain, to the new streetcar service, and to the bike sharing, as well as in the Civic Center and South of Market next to those new transit lines, so people can drive in, park, and then complete the rest of the trip on transit or on bike or on foot. We're working with the school district to look at satellite parking opportunities in the western part of San Francisco. On discussion so far have been Roosevelt and Washington high schools, which on the weekends could lend themselves well to satellite parking connected by shuttle to the Presidio. We also want to look carefully at the parking facilities that are sort of front and center in the viewing areas. We know that if they're not managed carefully, they could be a problem. If we don't manage the idea that everybody can drive to these races and they want to be right up in the front seat, then we could get ourselves into congestion and gridlock that we're working hard to avoid. We'd like to prioritize these parking facilities for very special and specific uses. They would include high occupancy vehicle parking, limited disabled parking, so people with disabilities can be sure to have access where they need it because the trip needs to be closer to the viewing destination. To look at the bike station and the bike sharing facilities as the temporary use for these parking facilities, and most carefully to make sure that we manage and give people real-time information up front so they know if they're pointing their car north to park in one of these areas and that garage and lot is full, that they get that information early enough so that they go to the satellite parking and sort of stay out of the way of the hundreds of thousands of people walking and biking and enjoying the waterfront. With that, I'd like to thank the staff, especially of your office, for all the help they've given us and for also the focus on the accessibility section. It's something I really hope to develop. I think John Paul Scott will give us he's worked with us to help us be aware of priorities, and we look forward to incorporating them in the people plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albert. I'd like to move the presentation along and invite Deputy Director John Paul Scott.
Ken, could you bring up the next presentation? Thank you. Chairperson Parsons, I'll go ahead and proceed with the overview since we're almost on time. The Mayor's Disability Council met with Peter Albert and members of his team to kick off the council and the public's involvement in the People's Plan from a disability point of view and advocacy. We had 3 meetings at the Physical Access Committee in which there was a lot of brainstorming and a charrette of ideas. And our office then took that material, kind of tried to pull it all together and organize it to how the actual plan was developed, written and drafted, and then brought that back to members of the council and the committee to rehash it, review it, add more material to it, disseminate it out to the public, and invite more comment. During this whole period, we continued to issue drafts to Peter Albert's office in MTA and the Event Authority so that they would see how this material was being developed. And as we're seeing in draft number 3, many of these elements have been added to the actual People's Plan as this process has been going on. So part of the work that is happening now is that we had a meeting on September 9th with the Physical Access Committee, and it was chaired by Chairperson Roland Wong. And we had a unanimous vote to accept and move forward the written public comment, plus summarizing the comment into 10 key points, as well as to recommend to the council that it move a resolution forward to bring that public comment to the America's Cup Event Authority. All right.
We'll close public comment and open up for council member discussion or question. Deputy Director Faguli, shall begin.
Hi, thank you very much, council members. I think it's also important to note that although the recommendations include the request for 2 ADA coordinators for the America's Cup events, both on programmatic and architectural access issues, it's really important that the People's Plan also addresses a marketing or informational campaign and how this is going to be structured, because although the programmatic access ADA coordinator may work on communication access issues, the public, the commuters, especially people with disabilities who are used to taking a particular transit route or a particular route, who will be affected, there needs to be education that happens way ahead of time, so that all of us have time to adjust to it. So I'm wondering if there's a much more detailed plan of public information that's going to go out.
Mr. Albert?
Thank you. Peter Albert from SFMTA. I appreciate the reminder about the work we're doing on marketing and information. The success of the People Plan really depends on not just what happens day of the race, but what happens well in advance of that. We are looking to coordinate 311 and 511. We're looking to do a lot of heads up, not just for people coming to the races, but all the employers and employees and the PTAs at the schools that are affected. But I really appreciate it and welcome the idea that we make sure that accessibility and the programs toward making the site more accessible are also part of the marketing campaign.
I think it's really important at that point to collaborate with local disability organizations and their constituents, so there can be some information from within rather than just 311 or 511.
Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Any other council member or staff comments or questions to our presenter? Councilmember Wong?
Yeah, I'd like to kind of address some of.
I think your mic is off.
Microphone is on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see, relating to alternative transportation, because sometimes, like, when we get to an event, it may be not so problematic, because, like, sometimes we plan to get there early, and so we're there already for any type of events. But the problem is that sometimes leaving an event because of the crowdedness of the event. And so sometimes it may be, very hard for a paratransit vehicle to be able to access the loading zone wherever that in the future we're going to be designing. So we would probably need to really think about that part of the plan also. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So is the paratransit perhaps using the emergency access? How do you plan the sharing the road, so to speak?
Right, thank you. Peter Albert again, and I appreciate the comment about making sure that we think about the different dynamics of what happens after event as opposed to before. The pattern typically is people come sort of in a steady stream, but they all leave at the same time for an event, and I think that makes access from the event difficult. So paratransit would be one of the priority access modes that would be protected and not limited to some of the closures that we're talking about. I think the idea that they could be part of the emergency access network is clearly one of the reasons why we want to have that. But I think that paratransit and all transit will be accessible are going to get priority paths anyway, and that includes the close-in parking locations that we would hope to not make available to privately owned single-occupant cars without that special priority. However, I want to make sure that I follow up on this idea of the dynamic of people leaving the event, making sure that the paratransit priority for people who need that access is preserved. I also want to emphasize what we want to do is program the area so that people stay after 5 o'clock. If the races end at 5 o'clock and people go to the cultural facilities or they go to the local businesses and support the local businesses, they're helping everybody. They're helping all the commuters who need those spaces on the trains coming home at 5 o'clock. We hope that people like to hang around the waterfront after the races are over. So we'll be active in programming what happens after the races so that people are enticed to stay longer. But for those who do need to go, the point about making sure that paratransit access is not precluded or obstructed is well taken, and I'll make sure that we include that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Chan?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Albert, for your presentation. For the people plan timeline, can you tell the public where the progress reports will be posted?
Thank you, Peter Albert again. I guess I can stop introducing myself every time I'm asked a question. What we've done is we've used the oewd.org website to post all of the public documents that we've developed thus far. If you go to oewd.org and you click on the banner that advertises the America's Cup planning, you'll see the America's Cup page hosted on oewd.org. To the right is a list of all of the public documents that are already available. They include the draft people plan. They include the progress reports 1, 2, and 3. They also include a bunch of other plans and documents that are related to America's Cup that aren't necessarily transportation documents. That will continue to be our public website, but we also have the americascup.org website hosting these documents as well. So if there are any questions about access or the use of those websites, I would be glad to help answer those questions, and for that reason I'd like to give them my contact information as well.
Peter, just to clarify, the captioner did not get the website correct.
Right, thank you. oewd.org, that stands for the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. It's a city website. But my contact information, I'm happy to share it with anyone who's interested in following up with questions they didn't have a chance to ask today. My phone number is 701-4328. My name again, Peter Albert, and I work with SFMTA.
328. Thank you, Mr. Albert. Councilmember Chan, a follow-up?
I had one more question on the implementation plans. For number 10, the youth involvement, perhaps could the America's Cup consider the mayor's youth employment?
I'm certain that they could. I have two colleagues here working with me from the America's Cup Event Authority, Ariel Ungerleider and Adam Vanderwater from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. And I see by the nodding behind me that they are agreeing that that sounds like a good direction.
That's very good because they work with the at-risk youths, so that would be very good for them.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Costanian?
Yes, thank you. On your mic.
These might be minor issues, but I was thinking on public transportation buses, they're usually about two-seaters. And then the other thing is that if there's weather, we've had strange weather, and I'm just wondering, will there be enough accommodations for people, in that type of situation?
Yes, thank you. The accommodation for people with disabilities on the buses, we're augmenting the fleet of buses to do more than just the basic service level to include that, and I would venture right now, we've had a commitment from every transit provider to make sure that the accessibility provision is within every bus that's augmented. We're not using buses that don't have accessible facilities. If the question is, will there be enough above and beyond to make sure that people with disabilities aren't stranded because there's not enough accommodations on the bus, I propose this strategy that seems to resonate well with all the transit providers helping us, that we would prepare 3 levels of plans, back to that point on adaptability, that not every day will be the 500,000 rider day, but we're always going to provide a little more capacity in each one of those days because we don't want to be caught off guard. We have a responsibility to make sure this comes off as a success. We've all bought onto the idea that this will be the most accessible America's Cup ever held. So by oversupplying capacity in a reasonable amount with every possible scenario is our way to make sure we have more than enough accommodation based on the regular service provider guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilmember James?
Hi. I just have a question about, I assume you're going to be having a media blitz so you can put out this information for the general public?
I would welcome.
And how soon will that be?
I'd welcome a media blitz, and if I were asked which would be the best time to make people aware of how much progress we've made, because there's been up to this point several great interventions with the media, making sure they're aware of the people plan, including the first progress report. Our obligation and our goal is to complete the draft people plan on September 30th. I think that would be a wonderful time to have a media event around that completion of the draft because, as I said, it remains a living document. It will need to be opened up again as the environmental process is concluding in November to fine-tune and tweak and refine it to make sure we pick up the environmental review process input. And then again in 2012 when we try our hand at really serving the races. So September 30th would be the next, but not the last, of a media opportunity to continue to evolve the people plan.
And you'll also have a website for people that can't make it and don't want to fight the crowds for that?
Another good point that I didn't mention in my presentation. There are a lot of people who would like to watch or be involved in the races and not have to leave their office or home or school. We hope to use strategic gathering places all over San Francisco. If you think, for example, how we did it with the championship celebration for the Giants, or the World Series that we're concluding in Civic Center Plaza, or the women's soccer matches that were played at Civic Center Plaza. That makes it natural, it's transit accessible, it's fully accessible, it's a great place for this kind of Jumbotron. We met with Union Square BID earlier this week, the Business Improvement District. They're interested in hosting a similar sort of remote but still engaged location for following the races in the Union Square area, possibly Halliday Plaza, possibly Union Square. The local businesses would like to do that because any way that they can get more people into their restaurants and pubs and bars, they're happy to do that. But I think that the technology aspect is huge. We have, working with our team, Stan Honey. He's the person who invented the yellow line that moves up and down the football field and lets people see play-by-play, real-time, what's happening on the ground. Now we're in the water, and we're using his technology, pushing that envelope, and making it as exciting to watch. I might even say more exciting to watch because you're going to be right up front and center with the cameras and all this technology. So the Jumbotron is not a second-tier way of viewing it. It could be a very exciting.
So we'll be on the 50-yard line, right?
Yes. One event that they tried out in Portugal that looked really fun was people could actually sit on a simulated catamaran. And the catamaran was facing a screen, and to really make it real, they were sprayed with water from time to time as if they were on the boat. So they were really trying to engage people without making you go down to the waterfront to be part of the event.
That's great. Thank you.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. Councilmember Wilson?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As there were mentioned, employment, is there any employment coming through any of this time for anyone?
Yes, thank you. We have a workforce development plan that focuses on local workforce as a priority employment pool. We predict 8,800 jobs that will come out of hosting the America's Cup, and we predict a benefit to the Bay Area of $1.4 billion in different forms of revenue, which is why all of us who realize how hard it is in the economic times we're facing, especially transit providers, are as excited as we can be to make sure that we pull this thing off well.
Thank you. I understand the America's Cup accepts volunteers, and I'm really, really admire what you folks have put into your efforts so far. in terms of being employed to volunteer with this project. I personally would be interested in any pilot projects or rollouts of the information system and how people will be informed if they have a hearing impairment, or how they'll know they're at the races by being sprayed with water if they can't see. But that's really exciting to me. I hope that you will keep us apprised of that. And I understand Ken Stein has a comment, a question for you.
I do. A couple of things that came to the attention of our office during two big crowds of last year's, and one not so big, that I want to bring to your attention, everyone's attention, because I think they have profound impacts on people with disabilities for the America's Cup. And they had to do with the Giants events, the Giants parade, and also just a much smaller event here in City Hall, where there were, a couple thousand people here for the award presentation, just packed in City Hall. Well, on both occasions, there was no cell phone coverage. And as a result of that, we've put in requests, and it'll be happening that instead of just having a mobile tower that will be brought in, they're putting an extra tower here in the Civic Center area, because in times of disaster, there will be a lot of cell phone coverage problems. But similarly with the event down there, we need to know that's going to happen. We need to expect it. We need to plan for it. But it also speaks to the importance of disaster communications that people have that are not connected to cell phones, and what was in the news a lot just last week, the problems of interoperability, so that the people who are dealing with the event can talk to the emergency people. All the different participants can be talking to each other to make sure that happens is so critically important. That'll be like for you to deal with. But much more to our office's point, there in the resolution, one of the things that the council has wisely talked about is providing disability etiquette training to all staff, event hosts, and sponsors. And what we found at the parade, as far as the paramedics and the police who were there was a real problem with someone who got separated from his medication, wasn't able to get to it. And so the need for disability sensitivity that our office will be dealing with city-side, in terms of our emergency personnel, but all of the people to know that the importance of disability rights issues. So it's not just etiquette, but also rights, and that people are kept safe in terms of medical emergencies.
I appreciate that. I want to go back to that point about legacy, and people think of legacy as constructing something, concrete and steel. The idea of program legacies that change the way we do things differently. We talked about the etiquette training. What I understood was that there were all kinds of problems in the celebration at the Civic Center with people who didn't even know that there were view sites set aside for people with disabilities and couldn't reach them. So the idea of people who helped make that last connection or help just with the overall approach to people, I think would be a terrific example of a program legacy that could come out of this, and I appreciate the input.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, and I just do want to emphasize that one of the challenges that we came across was that when we had relied on being able to communicate with people about access issues via cell phone, because there were so many cell phones in the area and the cell phone signals were all jammed, that way of communicating doesn't work when you've got 350,000 people in one area. So I think Ken's point is that we're going to have to figure out another way of communication and also alert people that if they're trying to meet up with someone, usually we're all so used to triangulating by cell phone, and it probably won't work with crowds of that size.
Yes, thank you.
And I hope we'll also consider text messages as a form of that information as well. We all have a flurry of questions, I'm sure, behind this, but we need to move our agenda forward, and I think it was a real wonderful presentation. In the beginning, we want to thank you very much for incorporating the Council's request within your people's plan, and we look forward to working with you